Right now, you're probably a few feet from a refrigerator, and inside that refrigerator, everything you can grab and put in your mouth has already been decided for you. Someone tested it. Someone labeled it. Someone printed an expiration date on the side of it and told you exactly when it stops being food and starts being a mistake. But your ancestors didn't have that. Not the label, not the fridge, not the government agency, not the study, not the warning on the back of the box. They had a mouth, a stomach, and a landscape full of things that looked delicious and would kill them in 6 hours. So the question is simple. How did they know? How did a species with no chemistry, no microscopes, no written language, figure out which berries fed them and which ones stopped their heart? How did they learn that a specific root had to be soaked for 3 days or it would poison their children? How did they figure out that some mushrooms were dinner and some mushrooms were the last thing you'd ever eat? The common answer is trial and error. Somebody ate the wrong thing. They died. Everyone else took a note. Except that's not really how it worked. It's messier than that, older than that, and stranger than that. And when you actually follow the evidence back, what you find is that your ancestors were running one of the longest, quietest scientific experiments in the history of life on Earth. And you're still running it today. Start about 10 million years ago, not with humans, with apes. There's a researcher at Berkeley named Robert Dudley, and he spent years chasing a question nobody else was asking, which is why primates have such a strange relationship with fermented fruit. His answer, published in a book called The Drunken Monkey, is that our tolerance for alcohol didn't come from beer or wine. It came from rotting fruit on the forest floor. When fruit falls, yeast eats the sugar, and what's left smells like food from a long way off. The apes who could smell it, walk to it, and digest it without getting sick got a calorie jackpot. The ones who couldn't, didn't. Around that same period, our ancestors picked up a genetic mutation called ADH4. That made them roughly 40 times better at metabolizing ethanol than the primates who branched off before us. Think about that. Your ability to drink a beer tonight is a 10 million-year-old adaptation to finding food that had already started to spoil. Your nose, your gut, your liver, all of them were shaped by the problem of what to eat and what not to. And here's the part that matters. Before humans had language, they already had bodies that were sorting the world into edible and dangerous. That sorting was chemical, silent, and incredibly slow. It took millions of years, and it was only the beginning. Now move forward. Around 2 million years ago, something changes. Homo erectus starts controlling fire, and fire rewrites everything about what a body can eat. A raw tuber that would tear up your intestines becomes soft, sweet, and safe. Meat that would give a chimpanzee parasites becomes protein you can absorb in an afternoon. Richard Wrangham, an anthropologist at Harvard, argues in a book called Catching Fire that cooking didn't just make food tastier, it made whole categories of the landscape edible for the first time. Fire was a filter. It killed bacteria. It broke down toxins. It neutralized the compounds in plants that had spent millions of years evolving specifically so animals wouldn't eat them. But fire doesn't tell you which plant to put on the fire. That's a different problem. And that problem got solved by memory. Not written memory, not personal memory. Group memory carried in stories, songs, and the mouths of elders, passed down for generations. A grandmother in a small band of 40 people knew which leaves to boil in the spring and which ones to avoid in the fall. And she knew it because her grandmother told her, and her grandmother had learned it from someone who watched a cousin die from getting it wrong. Every meal was a piece of testimony. Every recipe was a piece of survival data. And the people who listened, lived. The ones who didn't, didn't. There's a study from 2011 by an anthropologist named Joseph Henrich, who looked at indigenous food processing techniques around the world. He focused on cassava in the Amazon. Cassava is a root that contains cyanide. Eat it raw and you get sick. Eat it every day for a few years and you go blind, or your thyroid fails, or worse. The people who live with cassava have a multi-step preparation. That takes days. Peel it, grate it, soak it, press it, cook it. If you skip a single step, the poison stays in. And here's what makes that finding so important. Henrich asked people why they did every step. They didn't know. They couldn't explain the chemistry. They just knew that this is how it's done. And that's how their mothers did it. And that's how everyone who was still alive did it. That's not ignorance. That's culture doing the job that science does now. It's a system for storing information about danger without anyone ever having to understand why. The people who followed the recipe survived. The people who edited it didn't. Over enough generations, the recipe becomes the only recipe left. And that's true for cassava, for acorns in California, for nardoo in Australia, for lutefisk in Scandinavia. Everywhere humans lived, they built these long, strange, seemingly unnecessary rituals of preparation. And every one of them was the residue of somebody, somewhere, dying so that everyone after them wouldn't have to. And then there's the animals. Because your ancestors didn't just learn from other humans. They learned from watching everything else that ate. Ethnobotanists have documented dozens of cases where indigenous groups explicitly credit specific animals with teaching them what was safe. In parts of Africa, Healers point to baboons and porcupines as the source of certain plant knowledge. In the Amazon, tribes watch what tapirs eat during the dry season. In Madagascar, people follow lemurs to specific fruits. The logic is straightforward. If a mammal roughly the size of you can eat it and walk away, you can probably eat it and walk away too. Your ancestors were reading the landscape by reading the animals that had already spent millions of years figuring it out. There's more. Humans also learn to test food on themselves in small, careful ways. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer groups have described what's called the universal edibility test, which is essentially a slow, cautious protocol. Touch the plant to your skin. Wait. Touch it to your lip. Wait. Chew a small piece and hold it in your mouth. Wait. Swallow a tiny bit. Wait a full day. This isn't written down anywhere. It's not taught in a class. It shows up independently in cultures that never met each other, which suggests it's something humans figured out over and over again everywhere they went. And it's the same basic method a modern toxicologist would use if you dropped them in a jungle with no equipment. So here's the full picture. Your ancestors didn't know what was safe to eat. Not the way you know things. They knew it the way a river knows where to flow. 10 million years of biology sorting sugar from poison. 2 million years of fire opening up new categories of food. Hundreds of thousands of years of grandmothers telling children which leaf was medicine and which leaf was death. Watching porcupines. Watching baboons. Watching cousins. Testing tiny amounts on their own tongues. And waiting to see if the sun came up the next morning, and they were still there to see it. Every single thing you ate today rides on top of that. The bread was invented by people who spent generations figuring out which grasses could be threshed. The cheese was invented by people who noticed that milk stored in an animal's stomach did something strange and interesting. The chocolate in your kitchen took 1,000 years of somebody, somewhere, deciding that the bitter seed inside a bitter pod was worth grinding, fermenting, and roasting to see what happened. You didn't invent any of it. You inherited all of it. From people whose names you'll never know, who lived in places you'll never see, who died so that a recipe would survive. And look at your life today. You open a bag, you read a label, you trust that somebody, somewhere has done the testing. But the truth is, that testing started long before there were labs. It started with a primate reaching for a piece of fruit on the ground, sniffing it, and deciding it was worth the risk. If you found this one interesting, there's a full playlist of these origin stories linked in the description. Take a look. There's more down there than you'd think.